Ladies and gents, boys and girls, pronouns of your choosing, welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast. My guest on the podcast today is Andrew Lynch. Andrew is an award-winning journalist and the editor and publisher of Fire magazine. He's also been editor of the International Fire Professional, the Journal of the Institute of Fire Engineers, chair of the Firefighters Charity, and a trustee of the Fire Service Research and Training Trust. Fire Knowledge is a fantastic publication that brings together a team of fire sector specialists, combining former chief fire officers, senior advisors, and experts in the field of publishing. Their mission is to help to maintain the UK's position as a world leader in the fire and rescue sector, and to make a significant contribution to the body of knowledge and expertise that will keep the UK at the cutting edge of professional practice in the fire and rescue sector. But before we get into it, once again, let's hear from our amazing podcast family. Now, firstly, it's a really important shout out to our partner, William Wood Watches. Johnny's support, Johnny's informal coaching, sharing the wins, sharing his own journey, sharing the journey of his grandfather, and the journey of the brand, William Wood Watches. Now, coming on board with the Firefighters Podcast is not something they had to do. William Wood Watches is featured in GQ magazine, The Times, Esquire, Forbes, and now they've made it to the dizzying heights of the Firefighters Podcast. Let's get some realism. The reason it's so important to me, and I know it's so important to the brand, that they're aligned with the podcast, is because it's about authenticity. So look, I would suggest go over to their Instagram, go over to their website for your own benefit. But if not for that, do it as a favor to me, do it as a favor to the podcast. We wouldn't be gaining the momentum that we are without the commitment and support of this incredible brand. I was already an admirer and a fan of William Wood Watches long before the existence of the podcast. The company was founded in 2016 with the vision to create beautifully crafted British luxury watches from upcycled firefighting equipment. And they've got so many incredible designs, from the Valiant collection to the Bronze Sapphire to the Triumph to the Chivalrous. The upcycled materials used to make these are even sourced from the UK. The detail that goes into making these watches is so incredible. Even so far as that the London Fire Brigade helmet is actually melted down into the crown of the watch. It's named after the owner's grandfather. William Wood did 25 years in the British Fire Service. But for me, above all of that, and the thing that gets the most mentions of my watch, is the strap. It's fire hose strap. I know it's something they're so proud of. The straps are cast off Angus Duraline British fire hose rubber. You see them in the red, the yellow, I think there's the blue there now. There's just so much thought's gone into this. They are the longest serving partner of the podcast, and they hold a very special place in my heart, not only because I love the watch, not only because it gets a lot of mentions, but because I've seen this company evolve, and I know Johnny and the team are going to go all the way. So whether it's a retirement gift, whether it's a birthday gift, whether it's a gift to yourself, congratulations on a challenge, on a project, on a promotion, get over to williamwoodwatches.com and check out some of their incredible timepieces. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Andrew today. Anybody that is keen on personal development is going to enjoy this one. So without further ado, buckle up for safety, and I will see you crazy cats on the other side. Andrew, good morning, sir.
Hiya, you all right?
I'm wonderful, sir. How are you?
Yes, not too bad, thank you.
Thank you so much for reorganising, and thank you for your patience this morning.
That's fine. Has this happened before?
No, you're the first one. Hopefully that makes you feel special.
I feel I've always felt very special. Have we to be very discreet and not mention that we screwed up the first time round, or can I drop it in?
Of course you can. Yeah, it's a big part of learning, and getting second chances and trying to do it right first time, but knowing that, you've got to try and control the controllables at the end of the day.
Brilliant. Go for it.
Andrew Lynch, welcome to the podcast. How you doing, boss?
I'm not too bad, thank you. How are you?
I'm really good, my man. Thank you for coming on for the second time. I'm going to get that in there straight away. We had some time together recently, and through the wizardry of technology, there was, and I take full ownership of that. We had a hiccup, but we've managed to overcome it. We've leveraged our resourcefulness and our perseverance, and we're here again to double down for the second take.
And I have to say, the first time around was brilliant. It was
were amazing.
The best
Honestly,
podcast
the best
nobody will ever hear. It's hilarious from start to finish. This is going to be a devastating letdown in comparison.
It'll be the one that got away. The part where you alluded to the secrets of the universe was especially insightful.
I inspired myself.
I thought you did. Where you turned the water into the wine as well, that was specifically. And I appreciate in an audio form, it was difficult for people to truly appreciate that anyway. But inspiring nonetheless. So, Andrew, for people that are unfamiliar with yourself, and ultimately you're here today to talk a little bit about fire knowledge as well, give us an intro as to how you find yourself talking to us today and what fire knowledge is all about.
Basically, I got asked to do it. And as any willing journalist will attest, if you get asked to do something, you generally do it to see what the crack is. But we spoke previously, and we spoke quite in depth about the company that we set up a couple of years ago, 2019, just before the year before COVID, global pandemic struck, which is not the best time to set up a company. But it evolved from Fire Magazine, which is most people will be aware has been going since 1908, and I've been editor for the past 20 odd years. But we wanted to bring the magazine more into the sector. Previously, we'd been owned by a number of publishers who've done various things for it, but we had a feeling a few years ago that we really needed to make it more fire service centric and bring in more expertise to inform that. So basically mould those of us with publishing expertise and a little bit of fire knowledge alongside real in-depth knowledge about fire service progression, which is really important to us. So we formed the company back in 2019. The global pandemic struck and we faced natural struggles. But from those struggles came a real resolution to move the product forward. I previously pitched it in a very elitist sense. And I was speaking to one senior officer and he said, "Who's Fire Magazine for?" And I said, "For those senior officers and those on progression." And as soon as I said it, I thought this elitist claptrap has got to stop, and especially in the era we entered into. And I basically then said, let's open it up and make it available for everybody within the sector who's got an inkling of curiosity about the wider issues that are involved in the fire service and career progression and such like. So one didn't need to be on the promotional hunt, but just with a modicum of interest in what's happening in the fire world. And so we basically did a bundle offer, print and digital, offering to fire and rescue services at an accessible price to make it available to as many serving personnel as possible. And helped by, I suppose, by the virtual media that evolved instantly with the global pandemic. We got to speak to many, many chief officers and communicate what we were trying to do and how we've evolved the offering. Unfortunately, we've really took off, and it's absolutely flew in the year since we did it. We launched it. We've had an additional 32,000 subscribers,
wow.
which is just it's phenomenal. I couldn't have imagined that. 3 in 4 fire and rescue personnel can now access Fire Magazine. You don't have to read it cover to cover, folks. Don't worry. But we are working with fire services to sort of flag up articles that may be of interest to you in particular in your service. And I think that's the whole point, is we're not trying to make converts out of everybody. You don't have to agree and read with everything that's in there, but it's just about piquing the curiosity to get bits and pieces that may help you in the day job, but may also help you progress. We are very heavily into personal development. And as I said, it's really taken off. We've got, there's dozens of fire services have signed up, and I think that's absolutely magical. And I'm very grateful for those services that have signed up, and in various formats. They've really taken it on. They've done bespoke packages that suit them and suit their structures, and it's working really well. We've captured the whole of Scotland, Wales, London, South East, the great county of West Yorkshire.
That's massive.
And various others with sound reputations as well.
I wanted to double click on that because I love where you referenced this elitist mindset, because there's definitely a deeper thing going on there. When we speak about that aspect of development, it really does. If we played word association game, people say personal development and others hear promotion. Others hear progression. Now, progression and development, as we've said before, is as much of a lateral thing as it is a vertical thing. People think of this hierarchical structure of a ladder that you must surely only want to develop yourself through a sense of promotion. But I love what you said about now being able to offer, those small nuggets and knowledge bombs to people at different levels of their career. Even if, somebody has an aspiration to be a fantastic firefighter, and perhaps from a organizational structure, that is the limits of their aspirations. There's still so many ways for them to develop and progress. And I love that you've now had that realization. But how many people do you think still have that indoctrinated idea that progress and personal development can only serve you in a promotional perspective? Do you think we've really caught up to the idea that development is for everybody?
I don't think we necessarily have. I think we're still very much in the mindset as you describe it. as that if you want to develop personally, then you have to go on the promotional trail. And I think that's hogwash. I think there are many activities that people and initiatives that fire and rescue service personnel are undertaking at the moment that are massive interest to other services, but don't necessarily get promoted in the right way. They might not come under the right banner. And I think a journal such as ours is really useful for sharing that knowledge and insight and initiatives that really help people, not necessarily on the promotional trail. It can be just in terms of what they can get out of their career, their lives, and linking up with people as well. That networking and having similarly minded people to communicate with is really useful. We observe that with the likes of the Asian Fire Service Association, Women in the Fire Service, various other networks that are really useful, not just for progression, but also for personal growth. And I think these are fantastic networks, and we're part of that. We try and link people up and help people to understand better their role and what they can contribute.
Sorry, you said about the value of association. I just wanted to pause there because I feel like you kind of undersold yourself as well when we spoke at the beginning, because yes, you were given an opportunity, and yes, you kind of always feel like you say yes to those opportunities. But you yourself, as a journalist, you were editor and publisher of the Fire magazine, and then you took up, like you say, the role of the editor here. But you've been in that sort of sphere for quite some time. You know, a journal, writing journalism for the Institute of Fire Engineers, chair of Firefighters charity. How did you find yourself in the emergency services sector? Because it's a strange niche to double down into when historically you started off traditionally as an editor and a journalist.
Yeah, I think I just kind of stumbled into it, and then sort of through the rabbit hole or whatever, I just got further and further involved. I got dragged in, and it's a fascinating area. And I think that the benefit of being editor of Fire magazine is that you get to have fingers in lots of pies, lots of contacts across the whole sector. And the more I've been involved in that, the more that I've wanted to contribute and felt that I had something to say. And it takes a number of years, but I don't think it's. I think I've been fortunate to be in that position and have always wanted to kind of extend that. We're now in a slightly different, you mentioned the chairing the Firefighters charity. My term's now come to an end last November. Yeah. And the next step is to is to look at how this company of ours, this is a relatively new company, can evolve our contribution when we're talking about things like personal development. We're looking at executive recruitment to help bring in a diverse people into the service, but also help those wanting to progress in the service through the Practice to Progress initiative that we're developing. And that brings in, it helps everybody. And I think being part of the sector and knowing people within the sector, that there isn't a discrimination thinking, we just want to bring in people from outside, or we just want to see people from diverse backgrounds progress. We want to see everybody have the opportunity to progress and level the playing field as much as we can. So I think it's great to be involved, as I'm sure we've spoken about. You do the same. It's great to be involved, and the more that you get drawn into it, the more you want to, especially on things like charity, when you think, this is good stuff. It helps the health and well-being of the whole service and the sector, and they're giving something back, I suppose, isn't it? I'll say that quietly.
As a communicator, how do you see your role in relation to, you spoke about these chief fire officers and being able to be around these individuals and help them articulate and draw out the knowledge that they've accumulated over all of these years? And similarly, with people working in the sector, from people designing and producing equipment to people sort of upgrading and innovating with procedures and policies and stuff like that. How much is that art of communication being able to be sustained? Because I feel like we've gotten worse at communication, in all honesty. I feel like as a society, we're not as articulate as we used to be. The art of communication we're losing it a little bit as we perhaps become slightly more introvert, and technology consumes so much of our life these days. How much do you think the written word, and also I suppose the spoken word, when some of the stuff that you produce and the people that you interview, How important is it to try and sustain that? Because if you can't communicate it, if you can't articulate it, this knowledge is going to get lost.
Yeah, I think within the sector. I mean, I'm blinkered because I'm living within this sector, and I'm not. I know journalists from outside, but they're like different species because they have the challenges are so different. I think people within the sector almost uniformly are very benevolent people. Okay. They're very altruistic. And it's across the board. I can't target a particular area and say, oh, well, they're a bit selfish, those lot, the chief officers or whatever. They're not. They're gregarious, outgoing, communicative people who want to help and put something back and they spend their whole career doing it. It's the public sector mentality. And I also strongly believe that within the suppliers and the service side, who often are ex-fire service themselves, and often get branded as industry and this kind of commercial and these sort of words that mean absolutely nothing other than the fact that they're contributing to the health and well-being of the service and the public. So I think you're pushing against it. A long way of saying pushing against an open door. When we've put events on, people are always willing to contribute, to impart their knowledge. And do so willingly and hopefully at little cost as possible. And that's the same across the board. So I don't see this as some sort of dark art by any means. I think people across the board are wanting to contribute. I think there's a misunderstanding quite often. And there are communications challenges around the intent behind some of the initiatives that happen. And inevitably you get clashes between trade unions and what have you. That's an inevitable part of life. But on the whole, I think it's much more productive. And I'm not just putting a rose-tinted glasses on this. I think the sector as a whole is as progressive as it can be under the restrictions of the structures that have traditionally been in place and the institutions that are in place, as pointed out by the HMI reports. This is not a people issue. This is an endemic, systemic, historic situation brought about by governance structures that are often archaic, and you look at PCCs and different models trying to shake things up. It's not an instant solution. No. So I think there's a habit of getting introverted and thinking, oh, what an awful service, we're not treating our people as well culturally, etc. I don't think the situation, the issues are as stark quite often as people realise. I'm not downplaying some of the really important issues that have been pointed out by HMI, but I think we should be realistic about the people within and the intent and the purpose and some of the initiatives that are already taking place across the board to resolve those issues, of which we feel strongly a part. And certainly when it comes to personal development, we want to stand shoulder to shoulder, help people to progress, help people to progress from within and without the service, and to increase the diversity and the appeal of this wonderful part of the world. No. I was going on a bit there, Pete. You can butt in. Stop me ranting.
Honestly, I'm listening and looking with enchantment as you so effectively articulate that. But I wanted to ask about how difficult or easy is it to find these chief fire officers? These people, and it's not necessarily just chief fire officers, but a big part of fire knowledge is also some of the courses and stuff that you've put on. I mean, I've seen some of the work like Dr. Dave Sloggett's done and stuff like that. Some of those aspects of the training, they're really powerful as well, but you've got to be able to find, because you say, the people in this sector can be quite humble, can be quite benevolent. Is it easy to find people that feel confident enough to communicate this? Because part of that personal development is having effective teachers, and people like Dave, if you could expand around some of the courses that you've ran in the past and some of the feedback you've had on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. We find each other, I think is an easy way of putting it. I think people that are great communicators, are very knowledgeable in what they do and how they communicate that, become very well known. And Dr. Dave and I go back years and years. We've put on various events that have had absolutely phenomenal feedback from senior officers, fresh out of major terrorist incidents, and sort of saying, look, these scenarios that he's putting on are absolutely brilliant. And the work that he did sort of inspired me or us between us to come up with the Charter for Resilience, which is looking at developing the best possible response across the board. How do we ingrain that response? How does the fire service play its part in the broader response and resilience offering? And this was not just in the wake of COVID, it was at the outset of COVID that we set this out.
Well, there was a number of incidents as well prior to COVID, wasn't there? Some large national incidents where really tested our resilience, but also our joint working with a few other services, and how, as you say there, how do we play our role and bring the best aspects of the fire service to the floor in the way that we can support the other emergency services as well, because there's a lot of things that we do well that can benefit a lot of other services.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't long after I became editor that 9/11 happened and New Dimensions, and we did the first International Joint Operations Command Conference over in Belfast when that was fairly, the Good Friday Agreement wasn't long dusted down, and
that must have been an incredible event. That must have been great.
Yeah. Well, speaking to anybody from Northern Ireland, I've been through that, and there's less operational people now. It's phenomenal, and that sort of and those sort of conversations are absolutely fascinating because they help inform what needs to be done next. And it's such a shame that many of these learnings and the exercises that happen continue to happen. They continue to happen in silo, and the lessons are not learned. And it's just about trying to ingrain a much more informed and progressive and an absolute response to things, rather than it become talking shops and reports get put on the shelf and that are dusted down but rarely read. And I think being part of that response from the off and trying to keep banging the drum and keep trying to get these messages across that it's far too important to be put on a shelf. And we need to, and it's I suppose it's the campaigning journalist side, which is to keep prodding government in a responsible and hopefully progressive way, to keep reminding people that this is we needn't go through these things, whether it be Grenfell on the fire safety side, whether it be the terrorist incidents and responses to global pandemic.
I was going to say, there's the pandemic, but even referencing some of the things you've gone through there, going right back to 9/11, even some of the things that still go on and have gone on in Ireland, from the Manchester bombings and the attacks in London and some of the terrors. Some of these things are so. We've never experienced them before. Certainly when you look at the pandemic, certainly when you look at some of the big terrorist incidents that we've had to go through, they've been so traumatic, both for emergency services and the public sector, and even the government. While some people don't like to sympathise, they are also going through this, and they have the added responsibility, and people such as yourselves, to not just withstand and be resilient in the face of these incredibly traumatic events, but then, like you've just said there, we can't just recover from it and go back to the norm and say, oh, at least we came through it. It's very difficult to now realise that these are things we've never faced before on a very large scale, and we can't just keep doing more of the old. We really have to innovate, and that's when you see a lot of the Jessup work come out and a lot of interagency work in about fire service going into some of these hostile environments, how we train for and develop ourselves for incidents like that is very scary for people, because change has never been such a rapid and successive process as it is now. I keep saying to people, the only constant moving forward is change, because you used to see change as a more slow and progressive thing with the odd blip on the radar, whereas now there's a blip every day. It's an erratic and constant reiteration and change of process and policy. And how do you navigate through that fog, and how do you try and keep people on board being part of these processes, because there's so many factors?
Yeah, I think it's really important to recognise, because I like change. I love it. It's what drives. It's a comms thing. It gives me a buzz, etc. But not everybody's like that, and not everybody within organisations are like that. So it's really trying to understand how people operate and giving them the security, helping them with resilient mindsets, which is something that we were very much in favour of with the Firefighters charity. And it was interesting because as you were speaking there, when I joined the Firefighters charity, and particularly as chair, I wanted a couple of things. That I wanted the charity to be much more responsive and fleet of foot in responding to major issues. So trying to change, to turn that big tanker around so it didn't just float along as big institutions tend to do. Doing this
of a thing, though, isn't it? It is
doing the same old thing. And the other aspect was to be more public facing, so the public would help raise funds alongside fire and rescue personnel. We were very inward facing when it came to fundraising.
Yeah.
And those things, and then something like Grenfell happened. And of course, the response from the charity was to be really proactive, to go out to support frontline personnel that responded to Grenfell, to support the control operators, to support everybody within the organisation as much as we could. And I was really pleased and proud of that response, because it just sort of spoke volumes for the people that were within and able to do that. Nothing within the Constitution, the institution itself, said that we should do any of that. No. But as chair, I was very insistent on being as responsive and proactive as possible. So a change mindset is often just allowing people just to get on with it. I don't bring any expertise to that situation other than facilitating and allow people to give the best response they could at that time. And that kind of thing then goes, well, let's utilize that so that media begins to pick up on this great organisation and charity that's helping people who are helping others, and we used that. So those sort of two issues were really readily addressed, but only because we were willing and able to do that. And of course, the trustee board supported me as a semi-outsider in coming in and having that sort of mindset. But sometimes that's nothing against the chain of senior officers that have previously chaired the charity. And a couple of them would say, actually, you need somebody from outside. You need somebody with a different mindset to try and re-energize, to do things slightly differently. And I think the charity continues to move from strength to strength. The great tragedy is that my replacement, Paul Fuller, who took over as chair, sadly passed away recently, and had so little time to sort of carry things on.
So quickly. It really is only very recent.
Yeah. Paul Fuller is the chief of Bedfordshire and was the chief of the chair of the Firefighters charity, the chair of the Children's Burns Trust. Was involved in so many different areas across the fire sector as a whole, not just the fire service. And as he was coming up to retirement last month, unfortunately was diagnosed with cancer. And just as the treatment was starting, really, he was sadly struck down, which was a great loss, obviously, to the service, the sector, and his family and close friends. We were looking to work together in the company as well, and looking at putting on events. So he was looking at the next stage of contribution. But Paul was forever involved in every aspect of the sector, and personally speaking, a very close personal friend, and an incredible loss, a devastating loss to all within the sector. And he brought a form of leadership that we talk about now with diversity, that, that human, down to earth sort of appeal. Well, Paul had that in spades from the get go. He could walk into a room and light it up, and really just an absolute delight to be in his company, with the humour, the twinkle in his eye. But I remember years ago at a chief officers conference where he was with his then baby daughter, who was bringing the house down. Wow. And I thought, nobody's ever done this before. Nobody's brought their toddler or baby into an event like that. This man's like a human being. What's he doing? He's not being a faceless grey suit. And Paul was like that from both personally, whether you sat having a drink with him or you're at a formal event. He was irreverent, he was outrageous, but he was also incredibly respectful. He did things the right way, but would also be incredibly good fun at the same time. And yes, every event that he's not there is an incredible loss.
I love what you also said about when we were speaking about the way that the work the charity had done. As you sort of transitioned out of it, and as Paul began his work with it, it's really been something that I've seen a change in focus. And I love what you said there, and maybe there's something in it around Paul's level of self-awareness, and how much he valued his own sort of mental health and being himself when he was around other people, not feeling the pressure to sort of subscribe and adhere to these old archaic ideologies of how he should be. The charity really had took on a higher level of focus on well-being and the mental health aspect of it. How had that conversation gone between you and Paul? Because I've seen Paul speak about the importance of this before, and it was evident in how he had a healthy balance. You've said how he incorporated his family into a lot of the things that he did, and he seemed to really hit the nail on the head. Was that a conscious focus between the two of you to sort of have a greater awareness of the physical and the mental health?
No, I think I need to be wary in terms when we talk about a great personal friend, and then he took over as chair of the charity. He took over because he wanted to, and when a force of nature like that was ready to do that, knowing that he was coming up to retirement, they'd have the time to give, etc. It's an open forum. And we never sort of conspired to say, "Oh, I will pass the baton on to you." It wasn't like that.
Okay.
But inevitably, we had conversations around resilience and mental health and well-being, and Paul had that mentality from the start of not only having it in spades himself, which gives great encouragement and support to staff and the people, colleagues you work with, but also encourages other people to look at how you can build that resilience and how you can face up to some of the issues, including the challenges that he had. He had a great response to that, and sadly had so little time to actually exercise that. But I think he serves as a great inspiration going forward, not only for the charity, but everything that he was involved in, which, as I said, is extensive. People know him from so many different forums. And I would see him, because of a very fortunate and privileged position of being editor, you get to sit in a few of those forums. And Paul was omnipresent, but delivering on each occasion. He was chair of the Fire Sector Federation. When we need somebody to step up in a temporary position, Paul was there, and he was forever there in all these different positions, because he knew the leverage that he brought, the influence that he brought, the enthusiasm, and people followed him, and therefore he was omnipresent, and he just delivered time and again. And he once described, or he frequently described, he said, we're all Marmite, so we have to sort of put up the person that's most relevant in the particular situation, but we're all Marmite. And I reflected upon that when he passed away, and I thought, we're all Marmite. You weren't. People just did. The only way that people didn't take to you is because they didn't understand you. And that's back to the communication thing. You look like you're of an older generation. You look like you've been a chief for many years, which you had. But that meant nothing. You actually got to know him. You actually spoke to him. Even for a few seconds, you'd realise, oh, this is the most down-to-earth person, the greatest communicator that you could come across. Much in that respect, he was being misrepresenting himself there. He wasn't Martin. Nobody had anything much to say about Paul.
I mean, one of the things you demonstrate so lovely there, and I think Paul was great for it as well, is the aspect of acknowledgement. I wanted to ask you about the awards that you do. So every single year you do the Excellence in Fire and Emergency Awards, where you do recognise individuals such as Paul and so many others. I think that's a wonderful thing, because I think something that I have not seen a tremendous amount of in sort of the past years. I think we've been so busy trying to serve the external world and serve the public as well. We should be, that we can get quite poor at acknowledgement. I mean, how long have those awards been going on, and how crucial do you think acknowledging ourselves and each other is to encouraging people to continue to develop?
We started in 2014, and it was Paul and myself that co-hosted the awards, and it set off a trend by which we continue to this day of having either 2 or 3 or 4 hosts, and they're always from in the fire service. We never go down the celebrity host aspect. You could say that's because I'm cutting costs. It's not that. We get real talent from within the sector. I think last time we had Sabrina Cohen and Dave Etheridge. We've had and first couple of editions, Paul and I had a little double act going, and I didn't want to continue that for fear of repetition. But we always, in one way, shape, or form, managed to sort of showcase it at some point. But the point of it was to, as you say, was to really address and celebrate people that under-acknowledged in many ways. And the amount of times that senior people said this is so useful. After Grenfell, people were saying, this is what we need. We need this kind of positive feedback, and recognising particularly people that would go under the radar. I mean, when we first started, we did a few of what I'd call the fire service celebs to put us on the radar and to get the attention. But the more we've been doing it, the more we've gone for those 50-plus year veterans that people only within their services have heard of. And I've got a couple of names that spring to mind. Dennis Wickham from Hertfordshire, who won the Unsung Hero category over 50 years service. Roger Nunn from Cambridge, 42 years of 100% availability, which I think is reasonably impressive. Noel McKee from Northern Ireland raised over 600,000 for Firefighters charity and various other charities. So I mean, these are fantastic people. I think what it was all about was a few years back when the most inspirational woman winner said to me afterwards that she was inspired by the people that she sat next to, the Danny Cottons of this world. And although she'd done great in her career, she kind of thought, this is where I've got to, this is where I am. But after those conversations and receiving the award, she said, I'm going to continue now. I'm going to try and get as high as I can, get as far as I can. And that kind of inspiring, feedback is exactly why, that epitomizes why we do the award and why they go down so well. It's, they really are from the industry as well, which we sit alongside. There's not this sort of segregation that tends to go on where you sponsor it and then sit at the back and fire service get all the acclaim. We put people together and we have a celebration, and I think that's a wonderful thing. And it's something that Paul Fuller was intrinsically involved with from the start, and helped us to sort of elevate the whole occasion. But it's what we're about. Obviously, we can't always have fun and do it and celebrate in that convivial sense. But within the magazine, we've got the tagline now of informing, engaging, and inspiring. That's exactly what we want to do. And I think that's as good a raison d'etre as you can have, and that's why I spoke to the fire and rescue services with confidence, saying, we've got something to impart here. We've got something that is of use, and we want to inspire people. We want to get them involved in the discussion, in the conversation, and help the sector understand some of these issues. When the HMI can come along and pillar organisations for not supporting people enough, then we can say, well, in our small way, we can provide a service that is accessible, affordable, but also is of real use as part of this great fire and rescue service.
I think you offer like a wonderful scaffolding, effectively, kind of around a lot of these emergency services, around a lot of the services and brigades across the UK, because I hear what you're saying, and I love so we speak about the inspiration side of it there, but also the resources that you provide. So when we talk about inspiration, we all want to see these development aspects repeated, but a big aspect of repeating something is that, how does the saying go? It's, what gets recognized and rewarded gets repeated, and we often miss the first bit of that. We want to see these great behaviors and these great developments repeated because we've got to become not necessarily more resourceful, but we've got to keep that resourcefulness. We've never arrived, we've never finished in this eternal desire to try and innovate, to continue to deliver the very best for the money, I suppose, in terms of the public's perspective, give them the very best service. But we can never forget that recognize and reward thing. I think for some people, and I've seen this across services, I'd love to hear your opinion. Is there an aspect of finding it hard to justify the time or the cost or in recognizing and rewarding people, even if it's just something as simple as putting on awards nights and celebrating people and having them be acknowledged by their colleagues, by other members in the service, in the sector? It hasn't got to be, it's not, rarely if ever is it a financially incentivized thing. Just that aspect of recognition is a big part of being able to see this repeated. So when you talk about inspiring people, is that a big part of the magazine? Because I see some of the individuals that you feature in it and how you provide those resources. Is that what I'm seeing?
I certainly hope so. And I think that's something that I always do in conversation, I always endeavour to do, is inspire people, whether that's sat on the board of the Fire Sector Federation or the Firefighters Charity or the Fire Service Research. I'm just reeling off a lot of names now, but it's actually... I'm involved there because I want to inspire research. I want to inspire people to move on. And the magazine is no different. We've been, you mentioned change there. Being around since 1908 means that certain, you mentioned institutions as well. It can get very staid. How could it not in many ways? And I've been editor for 20 years. How do you keep reinventing reinventing, revitalizing, keeping the really strong, the good, healthy traditions, which I also recognize with the Firefighters charity. When you talk about change, people automatically sometimes get very polarized and think, oh, that means you want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Yeah. Whereas I've always thought, no, keep the strongest traditional elements. Tradition can be a great thing. You know, that reputation, that the ethics behind it, the morals, the mission, the moral compass. You want to keep all of those things, and then you want to bring it up to the 21st century and say, right, well, how can we revitalize this? How can we up the ante on this?
I say it's like you want to hammer off the structure that's taken shape on the outside. The core, like you say, the ethics and the values, nobody wants to get rid of that, but a lot of these systems and a lot of these thought processes will have been built in a time to serve a circumstance and serve a situation and serve, I say, a period of time. And we're not there anymore. So we can't get too precious, no matter whose names are associated with things, about procedures, policies, thought processes, corporate structures, and even structures within the fire service. They were built for a time that we're no longer in. But like you say, we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, those ethics and morals and values. And there really is kind of as innovative as the fire knowledge is, there is quite a classic feel in the way that it's professionally run as well.
Well, I certainly hope so, but it's those guiding principles that are most important to me. But also, as a what I would say is a learning organisation, a learning person, is that you look around what's happening. And at the start of the pandemic, I had to look at subscription base. I had to look at what was working in publishing, and I was really joyed to hear and read that the print product was going down well still. Yeah. And that was surprised me. I thought it would all be digital, it would all be online, it would all be different sort of subscription services. But actually, it was quite often a bundle approach, as I mentioned earlier, having a combination of both, that people could go to what they want. I'm an old guy. Not like you, Pete. I'm a proper old guy. So I go print.
You're not really that, but I hear what you're saying, yeah.
I can do Twitter on the phone, but that's about it. But I was speaking to people that are actually even older than me about this, and they said, I can't see my people reading print, the print product cover to cover. I said, of course they're not going to do that. They're probably going to read it on the phone. Yeah. People do that. They read an article on the phone. Imagine that. And they kind of go, yeah, I see what you mean. And so that's the whole point, is that you're flexible enough to give an offering in various different formats, not necessarily a format that you would ingest, but a format that other people would. But at the core of it is to say, there's a resource there, there's a depth of resource that you can delve into. And if you want to access to all of your personnel, then I would suggest that you flag up certain articles, that certain issues as they come up. But to try and instill people to read cover to cover, that's a difficult ask. But certain people do, and good luck to them, because I think it's useful. And if you want to know about what's happening with PFCCs, and there's one coming up in your organisation, then a couple of issues ago we did an in-depth survey, as we tend to do. We think, what are people going to be interested in? The governance structure, how is it going to affect them? Now, a lot of people go, oh, good grief, I don't want to read about that. But there's enough people within organisations who are going to go, oh,
definitely.
Weren't we looking to do that? Well, what's that going to mean? How did other services get on? Are they okay with that? Is this just a trend, or is it going to, blow over? Is it?
I love that you do that as well. Everything? I love that you don't just get drawn in to the sexy stuff, if you will, the sexy stuff that might entertain the masses, because often the things that truly keep a lot of these services going and are the subtle, smaller changes that happen within the service, and they will be policy driven, and they will come from government and things like that, and they might not seem sexy, but the effect, the impact that they have on all personnel within that service and across the entire UK from an emergency service perspective is massive. And you've got to have the self-awareness to know what is the important things that to focus on, and not just the new sexy equipment and then the latest incident all the time.
Yeah, I think we do that. And what I like about the magazine, and I'm not saying this from an egotistical point of view, what I do is employ people who are a lot better than I am to go out and do the work. So we've got some great contributors, and that's what I'm proudest of. It's not my knowledge, it's the other people that I sort of bring on board. And what they've done is
that's a wonderful aspect of leadership, though. So I just want to double click on that, because that is, you hit the nail on the head. And I speak to people about this all the time when they feel like being a great leader is they have to have all the answers. And you really, that was just the perfect soundbite when you say it's not about having the answers, it's about knowing and having the belief in your team that they've got the knowledge. You'll take responsibility and you'll make the decision if it all goes wrong, but acknowledging, again, you're just demonstrating it as we speak now, and I just wanted to capture that.
I've virtually none of the answers, so there you go. But what we did is what we tend to do more and more is, what is the fire service experience? You've got what government says, we've got what the national media says, we've got what certain aspects say, and they allege this and they allege that. So I said, go out and speak to people. What is the experience of women in the fire service? What is the glass ceiling? Speak to people who've butted their heads against it, who have crashed through it, what is the experience across the board? And we've done that with diversity, we've done that with next up is disability issues, neurodiversity. Is go out and speak to people.
I'm big into neurodiversity. I'm really looking forward to when you guys expand on that, because I think we are leaving so much on the table in terms of the people within our organizations because of our lack of awareness of neurodiversity. I'm so excited to see the outcomes of how your research, how the questions, how the people in the field report back their interpretation, and also perhaps the limitations they've experienced. We talk about that glass ceiling. There's a real glass ceiling for people that exist with the different neurodiversity perhaps. Yeah,
and I think I mentioned research earlier, is that it's by and large an under-researched sector. There's so much more to be done with contaminants, with everything across the board. And when we get hold of a bit of research, I like to shake it apart, see what's beneath the surface, but then go out and speak to people. That's the biggest thing, is survey the people. It's not a cheap and easy thing to do, which is why it cost me a fortune to get all these contributors together. Which is why I need your subscription so we can keep up in the ante.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, you're right, though.
I think it's really important. I do think it's important that we've got a part to play, and I sort of had this conversation, is that just because you've been around forever doesn't mean to say you should be around forever. No. What it does mean from my perspective is that if we're contributing something, if we're really playing a part in this sector and this service, then we want to continue doing that. Then I've got to up the ante, and I can't just write it myself because I've got virtually no knowledge, as we just described.
You've got
I've got to find people who know what they're talking about.
And you've got the drive and the desire for it.
Well, yeah, thank you. And I think that's where we are, and so inspiring is an absolutely essential part of that. And I think there's so much crossover in the aspects that I said with the charity. If you're going to get involved in a charity, you're going to get involved in a board, you're going to take on leadership roles. It's about inspiring. It's why Paul Fuller could just step in there and inspire a whole group of people from whatever background and do that. And why I was so pleased that he did take over. But we there are other people out there, and there are other inspiring leaders within the service, and I don't just mean sort of chief officer level, I mean throughout. People like yourself that take on different areas. You don't have to be heading up the organisation to show real leadership and real advancement, as we've recognised at the awards. You get hold of an initiative, whether it's community fire safety, working with the local children, and young people. It's kind of a whole list of areas within the sector where people have shown great leadership, and it's just a privilege to be around people, and it makes it easier when you have people around a table and you say, what we're covering next, and they're assailing me with ideas. I mean, I've got a couple of ideas, but I'm going to give credit to the contributors as well. So the more ideas you come with, the easier it makes my job, and we can cover more.
Those ideas that, and it kind of that intermediary period. You referenced the podcast there. I see where we sit in the middle of all of that is, I like to catch people such as yourself where they are given the middle ground of being able to slightly take off, or even totally take off the professional hat, even for a moment, and have the conversation that's being had in those rooms before people feel the overwhelming pressures. And there shouldn't be a difference between the professional hat and the passionate hat. But I like to see people take the professional hat off, let down the passionate hair, and speak about a subject matter or speak about something that they think is right or they think is wrong or they think is inspiring, without that massive fear of the ramifications that might come from putting it in print or putting the words down on something, or feeling they're representing their service or they're representing their company. It's that middle ground there, and I love, and I know you probably have these conversations every single day behind closed doors, and I love to see that more of that passionate rawness, whilst the end product of Fire Knowledge is not raw, we're seeing a lot more of that come through, and that sort of comes full circle, I suppose, back to neurodiversity. We're allowing people's passions to come through, not feeling like they need to be forced into a professional box that they feel they're never going to fit into. They can just do what they do passionately and still professionally, but it's a balance there, I suppose.
Yeah, I find it interesting because obviously the debate is getting squeezed, and you've got this very polarized views, and people tend to shout each other down, which is a great pity, and I think it's completely unnecessary. I think within the realms of what I do, I'm very privileged, is that I get to have a say, and what I try to do, and certainly in the comment piece, is to engage people. Yeah. And to engage people, you can't just do a list of management speak. You need to kind of form an opinion, throw it out there. And I think as long as you're doing it with a strong element of compassion and understanding, is that people might not agree with you, but they know you're coming from a good place. And I think that's what I would always try and do, especially at the moment in this day and age, is come from that good place and say, I'm supporting, I'm compassionate towards people's positions, but I can also form an opinion. Yeah. And I'm very, I did that within the charity. When you're talking about mental health resilience and health and well-being and some of the awful situations that people on the front line have been through, and we help them, but also at the same time talk about resilience. How can you learn from that? Post-traumatic growth and such like. And I'm really passionate about how can we help people be more resilient going forward? So inevitably there's difficult conversations that you're going to have around the edges there, whereby you're not disrespecting people who have really difficult and been through difficult issues, but at the same time say some people don't, some people cannot cope, and we want to help from the offset. And have a grown-up conversation about it. But that's the important bit, is that we're trying to help people. We're not trying to tell people what to do or anything like that. We're a resource, and utilising that resource. And that's when you can bring in things like neurodiversity and the different experiences people have. But I think it's good to have a debate and a conversation and a real I would say argument, but really get down to the issues. And I think that's what a forum like Fire Magazine is for. I think the events that we put on, it's for that as well. And I'd hate to think that we've become this kind of distilled, very cold sort of management speak journal that is just there for personal development and ticking boxes. I think that's awful. I don't think we're that sterile, and never would want to be that sterile. No. But at the same time, if you're signing up your service for all your people to access this magazine, you don't want to be hearing tub thumping, let's take it to the streets. You want to hear a very mature discussion going on that can engage people and get those conversations going and invoke that curiosity. I think one of the chiefs mentioned to me, how do I get I want my people to be curious about not just within this service, but the wider service, the neighbours, what they're doing, how that impacts on what we're doing, and why we're doing something that they've already thought they were doing ahead of us, and all this kind of stuff. And you go, great, we can do that. Yeah. And curiosity is that first step towards really, really getting engaged and inspired in what you're doing. I still find that with the sector and speaking to manufacturers, what is it you do? What are you trying to do? And we have that conversation in the magazine where we get new-ish suppliers come in and say, we want to reach fire and rescue services. Well, what do you want to reach? What do you want to tell them? Yeah. It's important how you address that communication. and engage with that readership and those people that you want to reach.
I think it's really interesting that what you said about people who have historically always done it very well, now sort of turning the mirror on them and getting them curious. You spoke a lot about curiosity, about how and how they've developed that, whether it's resilience, because you can arbitrarily just say, oh, some people aren't cut out for the sector, which is, it's a very ignorant mindset to have. We're bringing people into the sector now in a different environment than has ever been. So having those conversations with people that have been in 30, 40 years, but having, like you said, mature conversations about, well, what is it about your experiences? What is it about your approach? What is it about the way you see your job, the way you see developing in your role? What is it about that specifically makes you the way you are or makes you curious? What is that? Because the ignorant answer is to turn around and say people just aren't built for the sector. They're just not cut out for it. They're not resilient enough. They're not strong enough. They're not tough enough. They're not hungry enough. They don't care enough. Well, maybe not. I think more often than not, it's not. It's just that we haven't got the same environment. We haven't got the same structure that we once had. So being able to have those conversations must be quite insightful, but also quite challenging, because you must come across people that don't know how they do what they do. They can do a great job, but they break it down? Can they unpick the stitching and tell you how they've been so effective at what they've done?
Yeah, it's interesting because, the more self-aware individual will be able to unpack all that. But the rest of us, we kind of going, how do you do what you do? Oh, that neighbor, how do I do that? How do I do that?
Yeah.
It's not always that easy, and I think it's often getting that. I think I referenced that earlier, that where are you coming from in the first place? That's the values thing behind the beliefs. Those supporting kind of foundation blocks are really important to understand people, and therefore you can unpack everything else, because everything that I do within the fire sector tracks back to exactly what I am in the rest of my life, and the values and the beliefs that I have around that. There's no difference. If I wouldn't, I said, if you weren't doing this, what would you be doing? I'd be doing some form of, I'd be writing bad poetry and performing at a stand-up club in Hackney and getting booed instead of
I thought you still did do that. I thought I saw you.
Only on the odd Saturday.
The one-man show. I thought I saw that.
Yeah.
You know what, though? It's just hit me, though. Because I was listening then, and I was hearing your role and what you do, and it struck me the aspect of sport, because it's the whole thing about not all great players make great coaches. And I see you in that coach communicator role. You know what I mean? You've never been an operational firefighter. You've never been a chief fire officer. But even the best firefighters, the best chief fire officers, can they articulate, can they communicate what they're doing? Not always. They don't know why they're so effective at what they do. So that's where I see Fire Magazine, Fire Knowledge as such a crucial way to be able to unpick, distill, explode, and then pick apart, and you coming up with these resources for those people that do want to emulate or repeat or develop or grow or nurture that aspect of themselves that they see demonstrated so powerfully in somebody else. That's where I see it. I feel like it's just hit me like a lightning bolt. Does that seem true at all? Or am I just off on some bloody rant?
I mean, I like it. Sounds good. So
it
yeah,
sounds great. I'm not sure it makes any sense, but it sounded good.
I think it does in terms of. Well, I was previously. I think I mentioned at the start about coming from many publishers have owned Fire Magazine, and it's very difficult to speak to publishing regimes about what you're trying to do, how you're trying to do it. Why it's important? Why is diversity important? They don't care. Is the revenue? And this is not all of them. I hasten to add.
Okay.
But why isn't the revenue going up? Why aren't you getting more income from this and that? Why aren't why are the ads not up and blah blah? Now, when you kind of bring it in and you're responsible as much for the company now, then it was embarrassing previously not to just to talk about it, just to put it in print and say, this is what you should be doing. Because it's like, oh, Lynch is rattling on again. Go back to your bad poetry in Hackney. Who cares about it? But to have something where we're delivering it, we're actually practicing what we're preaching, as it were. I think that's really important. I think it's making an active contribution that doesn't necessarily light up the coffers, as it were, but it does contribute to the sector. And in the grander scheme of things, that's much more important. It's being consistent. It's been around. That's what my directors talk about. We want to be around forever because we've got something to contribute. Yeah. We've got something to say, and we've got something to add, and that's as good a reason as any for sticking around. Now, and I can still do that. I can still do the bad poetry on a Friday.
Of course you can. Absolutely. Knock yourself out. Now, we've
for those people desperately Googling me doing bad poetry on a Friday, you're going to be terribly disappointed. You're not going to find me anywhere.
We'll force you to put in a special feature.
Yeah.
We've spoken a lot about development, about challenging ourselves, and we've come to that point in the podcast where I want the two of us to kind of challenge each other, because I know for me personally, brevity is something I struggle with on an almost daily basis, and I'm sure in your roles, you've got to make that 500 words. You're not allowed 600-700. So I want to come to that quick fire part of the podcast where I'm going to force you into a little bit of a corner and ask you some quick fire questions. Now, we've said, and I'm going to force myself to ask this question briefly, we've said we're not allowed to acknowledge professional people all the time because these examples exist everywhere. So in your personal life, I want to hear somebody that inspires you personally that no one else, maybe somebody else has heard of, but nobody else has heard of, nobody else is aware of. Somebody who inspires you and why.
Well, people will have heard of him, but it's back to value stuff, and I never realised it until I was a lot older. But I was named after the boxer Joe Frazier, who fought Muhammad Ali just after I was born, and he beat him. And my middle name is Fraser. I know it was such a pivotal moment, my father naming me, because he became, obviously when I was growing up, my hero, and I learned all about his background and his impoverished background and the contrast with Ali and the way that they lived their lives, etc. And it was so pivotal in speaking to me about diversity and the importance of acknowledging people from various backgrounds. I'm sure my father was thinking slightly archly, given his background, Irish-Scottish sort of background himself. Yeah. But it was just, that was one of those things where it was an unconscious assimilation that took me many decades to realise that he was doing me a great favour there, speaking to me about those issues from the very, very earliest stage. I'm not advocating fisticuffs or anything like that, Pete. That's not what it was about. It was just,
there's many lessons to be learned from boxing.
It's my middle name, and that's where it came from, and I'm eternally grateful from that. So I think that was an easy answer. That's why I jumped to that one.
Leadership. Now, we've spoken so much about it here, so I want to force you into 2 or 3 things. We spoke a lot about Paul. We spoke about some great leaders in that you've had experiences with. But what are the most important 2 or 3 qualities for a leader to possess?
Humility, humanity, humour. 3 H's, I think.
Nice.
And I did just make that up, by the way. That wasn't pre-thought.
Bit of alliteration as well. So let's hear them again and a small expansion on each. We've got humility.
I can't remember what. Humility.
I can't remember what I said.
I remember what I said. It was 3 H's.
Humility,
humour, and humanity. It might not be in that order. You can put it in whichever order you want. I think humour is incredibly important.
Humour's massive. Don't take yourself too seriously.
It is because and it helps grease the wheels, and in a very important way as well. I think humanity in everything we do should be.
It does seem to be something we're hemorrhaging at the minute if we don't get a little bit better at it.
Yeah, I truly believe that. Another word for that was compassion I mentioned earlier. I think it's just, I keep having to do that myself because I can start ranting and raving and be very sort of navel-gazing Yorkshire tyrant at times, as my grandchildren will accuse me of being.
You know what? You do put some action behind your words though as well, so there is that caveat.
Yes. Genteel action. None of that fisticuff stuff.
No fisticuffs. You're not a tyrant in that aspect.
Do you want me to explain humility?
Hit me with it.
That might be more difficult. Apparently, that's a real virtue to have. And if I can fake that one, as the saying goes, then I can get away with anything. I do think just having a little bit, and I did that at the charity, when you just look at the people around you and think, they're so good at what they do and there's so much expertise, is instead of trying to egotistically compete with that, and that's what the habit people fall into unconsciously is, well, I could do that, or I could do that better, I want to do. Actually, just let it go, and you'll find that the things you're good at are really, really important because they're the more important things. They're the more useful things. And when you talk about humanity as a leader, well, all of the stuff that is incorporated within that, if you unravel it, the compassion, the decency, the love for others, the understanding, those are the most important things you can have. You can have all the smarts in the world, but that doesn't necessarily navigate your way out of a paper bag. No. You can always employ, you can always bring on side really, really smart people, but they don't necessarily make the best leaders, as it were. No. I think they can be encouraged to do so, but I think it's much more important. And the older and I suppose less wise you get, then the more you understand that those things are really much more important. I'll ask my 8-year-old what I'm good at. And she will say that, the really important things like getting her a drink and things like that, and
being a daddy,
and throwing her upside down, grandfather more like. That's what I'm good at.
You've given me a lovely segue there, both into the next question, but kind of as another lens for development.
But you haven't answered yet. You're coming back on you.
Whoa! Come on, I'm interviewing it. What do I think the most important aspects of leadership are? Yeah,
give us 3. Alliteration.
Oh, I'm going to do alliteration as well. I'll give you my most 3 importance. I think empathy. Empathy for me is massive. Seeking to understand rather than just being heard. And I've been terrible at that in the past. Very, 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 very poor. And I still do it on the podcast at times. I'm so excited to share an insight that I have just had from something insightful you've said that I miss the next thing that the person is saying because I'm not being present.
We're all guilty of talking it over each other, as I'm just proving. Go on.
I know. And I need to get better. No, because, and we've said about it so much here, and I'm elaborating too much. I said it was going to be brief. The art of communication. Do you know what I mean? The art of bloody listening, Pete. That's one. You know what I mean? Because that is something.
We're giving it. Yeah. We're going to display the disaster of communication, the car crash of communication.
Maybe. I think we're good to... we justify it with excitement and passion. That can be a convenient excuse, certainly for me, and I think for a lot of people.
We're having far too much fun doing this.
Far too much fun. Let's get serious. Yeah. So those 2, and I wouldn't know how to articulate it, but I'm going to say getting shit done, practicing what you preach. Do you know what I mean? Not just doing the nasal gaving, not just being willing to get into the trenches, never being too good to roll up the hose. I think that is an important, and I know it's not just about fire service, but that for me, practice what you preach. Never ask somebody to do something you're not willing to do yourself. You don't have to have done it in the past, but demonstrate that you're willing to do it. And I think that feeds into empathy as well, in that it gives you an appreciation for what you're asking of somebody, and is it realistic? Yeah. They'd be the big ones.
That's good. That's good. I'm impressed.
Thank you. You caught me totally off guard. Where was I going with the first bit? The lens that you gave me, strengths and weaknesses. You said really beautifully about we spoke about acknowledging and people who are wonderful at what they do. But a big thing about development is we constantly focus on trying to improve your weaknesses. Shouldn't have any weaknesses. Can't have any weaknesses. Get better at your weaknesses. But I love what you said there, if I was hearing you correctly, about sometimes just strengthening your strengths and appreciating those people around you who can do the things that you are not an expert at, and not trying to copy them. So my question to you is it more important, or would you think it's a better focus of your time to focus on making your strengths really strong, or focusing on the areas that you are weaker in? Where do you think people, and in turn acknowledging the people that can do what you can't do, where do you think is the healthy balance? Because we should have the awareness to work on things we're not great at, but not to the extent where we are all 80% at everything. And then, what have we achieved? We're all robots.
It's an interesting one. I think Daley Thompson, the decathlete, once said he didn't bother with his weaknesses. He just did all his focus more on his strengths, and he did all right. I cringe thinking about my weaknesses, because if you made me do a list, IT, just goes on and on and on. That word that you mean, what's it? Empathy. What's that? I don't know. It's a difficult one, isn't it? I think one try. There's nothing wrong with trying to improve areas that you perceive as being a weakness, but I also kind of like that. if you've got an area that you're flourishing in, and the older you get, and generally, I think, and I've noticed this with friends and colleagues, is that you get to explore a certain area. I wouldn't say expertise, but your thing, and you become known for that, and people recognise you for that. You know about procurement, or we'll go and speak to Bob about procurement. You're then at a great risk of people saying you are just you're wonderful, that kind of thing. And I think it's a great leveler, back to that humility, is when you can then remind them that you can barely cross the road without guidance.
Yes.
On other issues.
I can barely
do that. It's just, that's why having 3 grandchildren who are at various levels can basically critically pan me in every conceivable way. But you need that after walking off,
Keeps you grounded.
Yeah, after doing the awards, and you 10 foot high, and you sort of walk through the door and you go, oh man, people laughed at me, and they're going, they what are you? You think you're funny?
Yeah.
What? Were they drunk?
Yeah.
Were they desperate?
People listen to you. Yeah, were they drunk?
Did they pay?
They said I look great. Were they blind? Were they?
Yeah.
Was this? Would they have a dog and a white stick?
and that's the benefit of coming from Yorkshire. I just visited recently, and I was reminded by the crushing criticism that I got from my sister, because she said he's still running. I like the old exercise, like you, Pete. You're not the only one. And I said, "You still run?" I said, "Yeah, I still run, and I still do weights."
Yeah.
And she said, "You do what?" And she waited until the whole family was there, and then said, "Guess what Andrew does now? Do you think he does 1, darts, 2, I think it was something, a snooker, or 3, weights? He's a weightlifter now. Look at him." And I thought
Bless her. Thanks for that.
That was so cruel.
Yeah.
There is a muscle in there somewhere, and I just thought, I think this comes from getting in there before my malicious sister does so, who gets away with it because she works for the NHS, so she gets the clap.
She's a hero, yeah.
She's a hero. I think I mentioned it in a previous interview. She's a hero. Through great teeth.
I totally agree. It is humbling when people say that. Like some people say to me sometimes, and they go, "Oh, you still training then?" And I think, why don't I look like I am? I thought I was doing all right. Whoops. Bit of
my mother, are you still shy?
Yeah.
Can you not speak to anybody? You say, well, that was when I was 3.
Yeah.
Give me something.
Do you still wet the bed? No, I don't, to be fair.
Half a century ago.
About 30 years, to be honest.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I just know it was something you used to struggle with. Thanks. I appreciate that. Proudest moment in the job. Brevity. Come on. Proudest moment in the job. Let's get on task.
I've got to split it between chairing the charity and editing Fire.
Is that because you're still romantic and nostalgic about the wonderful time that you spent at the charity, and you did contribute some great stuff?
No. I think it would be remiss not to put charity at the head, but also Fire has enabled me to do that kind of thing. So I see that as intrinsically linked, and yeah, good. I'm grateful for both.
You spent a lot of time with authors, with other illustrators. You're very aware of a lot of resources. Professional question: is there a book, film, documentary, resource that somebody that's never done any, or that thinks they've never done any personal development? Where could they start? Where's the first place you would point somebody to say, "I tell you what, start there and let me know what you think about it, and I'll maybe give you a nudge afterwards"?
I wouldn't start at Ken Wilber. I'd probably finish there. Go for Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. That'll whet your appetite for life.
Absolutely. For people that are unfamiliar with that, give them the brief overview of his story and his journeys in. Yeah,
it's like Primo Levi, who came from was subject to the Holocaust and Auschwitz and the concentration camps, and somehow managed to survive as thousands around him were dying, and he linked into we're talking about resilience, a state of mind, and realised that having something to connect to and some mission in life actually transformed his whole way of being, and led to a sort of a therapeutic approach that he practiced, I think, back in
It was that
in Austria.
change, wasn't it, in that mindset where he saw himself as his role was to tell the story after he had survived through it. He was going to document it and take the lessons
That
learned.
was his mission, yeah.
Absolutely. And if he hadn't envisioned himself as that, part of that process was, in order for it to come to fruition, he was going to have to survive it. And it kind of gave him a strange detachment, I suppose. It's a wonderful book. It's a wonderful book. We're not being brief. For God's sake, Andrew, I'll take some responsibility for that. Sorry.
Meaning, it's a good thing. Find one.
Absolutely. Habits, very briefly. Habits. What habit do you think, personal habit, you've developed or really doubled down on in the last sort of 1 to 3 years that you think has really helped you personally or professionally?
Habit. I suppose the discipline of how I approach life, which is a habit of instilling a discipline around exercise, healthy eating.
I did think you were going to say weightlifting
meditation.
As an obvious meathead now, as a real gym bro. I thought you were going to say weightlifting.
Yeah.
Just the steel.
You can see me on the screen. You'll be like that.
That's why I'm shying away from the camera, you see, because I feel very inept, very inadequate.
Far from it. It's just the opposite. I would say that would be a habit is a lifestyle sort of habit of doing that and giving some sort of structure to the day. I think COVID taught us that, didn't it?
I think so.
People out there with your wine. We've all done that as well.
We all have our vices. Yeah. And let's look to the future, Andy. So Fire Knowledge, Fire Magazine, what's next? We are entering a strange and fascinating, exciting, scary time now, post-pandemic, hopefully. We're talking post-pandemic. Let's talk about it like it's past. What have people got to look forward to? What can they be looking to see coming through the magazine, through Fire Knowledge in the coming months, in the coming year? What's the big focus?
I wouldn't say one thing. I think it's that progression, that and assistance with that progression. Our practice to progress is going to be unveiled probably in the new year, which we took from a police model, whereby we're helping people from before interview stage, getting all the advice necessary and the coaching in order to help people to progress through where they've struggled in the past. And that really will help and influence people from all backgrounds within the service. And please just check out our website and look out for that, because I think it'll be useful for all. As we're doing with exec recruitment, as we're looking to do in the magazine, which is to cover everything. And if there's anything that you aren't seeing in there that you want to see in there, please do drop us a line. And if you aren't seeing it, just tell your line manager, because you should be. And that's a huge ambition, is that I'd like everybody within their service the opportunity to be able to access the magazine. Yeah. And I'll keep banging that drum until we get there. Because I think it's an asset for everybody to.
So all of that will be in the notes for the podcast, both from a service perspective for people listening in that feel they want their service to be able to have access to this. Of course, they can join up and subscribe for themselves, but the ultimate goal is to have our services lead by example and truly invest in something that's going to develop their people. And I mean, personal development should be an aspect of personal accountability to it as well, but as from a service, we have an obligation to have at the interests of our people to develop themselves. So we've got to really lead by example.
Yeah, I think it's much cheaper, you see, if you do it through the organisation. I think that's, we're not about fleecing organisations, about public service organisations, where they're about supporting. So if you're to do it individually, it's going to cost, comparatively speaking, a fortune. But if you go through an organisation, then you're going to get it for a massively reduced rate, and that's what we're here for.
And we know it's expensive to develop people, but you can develop people and they might go on to other services, and we think, oh, that's a waste of time. But worse than that, if you don't invest and develop people and they stay, then surely everybody loses. So this is is where it needs to be heading.
Absolutely, yeah.
Andrew, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day. Round 2 was better than round 1, I think. You didn't...
Do you think?
I think it was. I think it was.
I don't know.
I know you didn't turn water into wine, and I know you didn't unveil the secrets of the universe, but you shared the home workouts. I look forward to the home workout videos coming out and your new passion with the steel. I'm checking.
I didn't wax lyrical about the plant-based diet, so you'd be grateful, people at home, for that. But if you are interested, Dr. Michael Greger's book, How Not to Die.
How Not to Die. Great. That's a really good. It's some of it's got some controversial reading in it, but I found it insightful. There's definitely some nuggets to take away from it. Andrew, thank you so much. As I say, the notes will be in below, and I look forward to seeing you, hopefully, at the Emergency Services Show this year, and definitely the awards.
Yes, will do.
I look forward to coming in and acknowledging and recognising everybody that's, because there's been some incredible ambassadors really step up to the plate during this challenging time over the last sort of 18, 24 months. So, I look forward to seeing how you decide who we're acknowledging next. Not you yourself, but I know we do it as a group.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you, my friend. Take care of yourself,
yep.
and I will speak to you soon.
Yep, you too. Cheers.
Take care, Andrew. There we go, folks. That was my chat with Andrew Lynch. A big delve down the rabbit hole of personal development in every aspect of the fire and rescue sector. If you want to hear more from Andrew and the team, jump onto the links in the notes. That will take you straight over. We can find out more about Fire Knowledge, about Fire Magazine, about the Firefighters charity, and so many more. Don't forget to head over to our Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube channels. We have sound bites from every single episode. Your favorite little nugget captured in a sound bite from one of our guests, giving us some great little takeaways from each episode. So head on over there, like and share the page. It would really help us out. If you've taken some value from today's episode, it would be a massive favor to us. Don't be selfish. Give this gift to somebody else by sharing it with them and spreading the word of the voice of the emergency services. Don't forget as well, our partner HAIX is giving away another fantastic piece of footwear this month. Could be fire boots, could be hiking boots, could be military boots, special forces, could be trainers. But as is always the case, you've got to be in it to win it. So head over and find that post, the HAIX partnership post on the platforms. Tag it, like it, stick somebody else in there, share it on yours, and you will be in for a chance to win. So all that's left to say is thank you. Really loving the guests we've got at the minute. Seem to be on a really good hot streak. Some fantastic guests. As we swim deeper in this ocean of frontline workers, seem to be finding some absolutely incredible people. Now it is my eternal mission to hunt these people out and serve them up on an audible platter for your listening pleasure. So until our next feast, look after yourself, look after each other, stay happy, stay healthy, stay hungry, and I will see you again real soon, right here on the Firefighters Podcast.